It happened on an ordinary afternoon, but the memory of it will haunt me forever. I was standing on the front porch, clutching a small paper bag of groceries, just a few essentials I could afford. My son stood there, tall and proud, his expensive jacket gleaming under the sun. I looked at him with all the love in my heart, the same love I had carried since the day I first held him in my arms. But his eyes held nothing but coldness. "Why do you even bother showing up like this?" he sneered, glancing at the worn shoes on my feet and the wrinkles on my dress. "You embarrass me." I opened my mouth to explain, to remind him that I was his mother, that I only came because I missed him. But before I could say a word, he spat. Yes, he spat. Right at me. The world seemed to stop. I froze, staring at the wet stain on my cheek, too shocked to move. My hands trembled, the groceries slipping from my grasp and scattering across the ground. A bruised apple rolled toward the curb. I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that maybe I'd imagined it, that no child of mine could ever sink so low. But then I heard his voice again, sharper than the spit itself. "You're nothing but a poor, useless woman. Don't come near me again." His words cut into me like knives. My heart cracked wide open. I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. Neighbors across the street turned their heads, pretending not to look, but I could feel their eyes burning into me. Shame flushed my face. For years, I had dreamed of this boy growing into a kind man. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake sewing his school uniforms, all the meals I skipped so he could eat more, all the coins I saved so he wouldn't feel the hunger I endured. And yet, here I was, standing in front of the very child I had given everything to, being treated like filth. My lips trembled, but no words came out. What could I say to a son who had already decided I was beneath him? I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, but the sting wasn't from the spit. It was from the betrayal. I took a shaky step back. He didn't follow me. He didn't apologize. He just turned his back and walked away, as though I was a stranger he had no reason to care about. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I had always thought of myself as powerless, a poor woman who had nothing to offer but love. But standing there with spit drying on my cheek and a broken heart in my chest, I realized something important. His cruelty did not define me. His rejection did not erase the years I gave, the sacrifices I made, the love I poured. I bent down slowly, gathering the fallen groceries with trembling hands. My tears blurred the world, but in the blur I saw something else. A fire. A spark I hadn't felt in years. Maybe I was poor. Maybe I was broken. But I was not finished. He thought he could spit on me and walk away. He thought his money and arrogance gave him power over me. But life has a cruel way of turning tables. And little did he know, the next time he stood beneath a roof begging for shelter, it would be mine. And when that day came, he would remember this moment. When I walked home that evening, the sting of his spit still on my skin, my mind didn't go quiet. Instead, it pulled me back through time, to the years when I was younger, stronger, and willing to give everything for him. I remember nights when I worked until my hands blistered. During the day, I cleaned offices, scrubbing floors until my knees ached. At night, I stood behind the counter of a small diner, serving coffee to strangers until dawn. I wasn't working for myself. Every coin I earned, every ounce of strength I spent was for him, for my boy. There were weeks when I had nothing left for myself. I would hide my empty plate so he wouldn't see. I told him I wasn't hungry when in truth my stomach twisted in pain. I'd rather starve than see him go without. I can still hear the rattle of the old sewing machine, the way I pushed its tired needle through worn fabric to patch his school uniforms. He never knew that his new clothes were actually stitched together from old donations, made whole again by my hands. I wanted him to feel proud walking into school, not ashamed like me. There was one winter that almost broke me. The heater had given out, and the house was colder than the streets outside. I bundled him in every blanket we had and sat beside him, shivering all night so he could sleep warm. That morning, when he smiled at me with his missing front teeth and said, "Don't worry, Mama, One day I'll take care of you. I believed him. Those words kept me alive. I lived for that promise. I scraped and saved every dollar for his education. I sold the only heirloom I ever had, a ring my mother left me. I can still see the pawnshop owner's greedy smile as he handed me just enough cash to cover another semester's tuition. My heart ached as I let it go, but I told myself it was worth it. That one day, he'd see what I'd given up and he'd be proud of me. But standing here now, remembering his words, useless, poor woman, I wonder if he ever thought about what it cost me. Did he ever remember the nights I stayed awake so he could sleep peacefully? Did he ever think about the meals I skipped so he could eat? Somewhere along the way, the sweet boy who kissed my cheek after school, who held my hand and said I was his hero, vanished. In his place stood a man who looked at me with shame instead of love. I try to remind myself that my sacrifices weren't wasted. They made him who he is today, successful, confident, walking in the world without fear of hunger or cold. But the bitter truth settles heavy in my chest. All my love only made him forget what it means to value it. I whispered to myself that night, lying in bed with the tears I couldn't stop. How can a son forget his mother's sacrifices so easily? And as I stared into the darkness, the answer came. Maybe he never truly saw them. Maybe he never wanted to. But fate has a way of opening blind eyes. And whether he wanted to or not, soon. He was going to see everything. The hardest part about being a mother isn't the sacrifices you make. It's watching the child you raised turn into someone you can barely recognize. There was a time when my son was my shadow. A little boy with bright eyes who would tug at my apron and ask, "Mama, will you always be here?" And I'd smile through my exhaustion and say, "Always, baby, always." Back then, he'd run into my arms after school and he'd brag to his teachers, "My mama is the strongest person in the world." But life has a cruel way of changing people. As he grew older, something inside him shifted. It started small, a hint of embarrassment when his friends saw our old car, a hesitation before he introduced me to anyone. He would walk a few steps ahead on the street, pretending we weren't together. I noticed, but I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers can be cruel without meaning it. But then, the distance grew into something colder. One evening, I cooked his favorite meal, collard greens and cornbread with fried chicken I could barely afford. I was so proud, waiting for him to taste it. He sat at the table, glanced down, and muttered, "Why do you always cook poor people food?" He pushed the plate away like it disgusted him. My heart clenched, but I swallowed my tears. I told myself he didn't mean it. That maybe he was tired, but deep down I knew. He was ashamed of me. As his world expanded, mine seemed to shrink. He started wearing expensive clothes, hanging around people who looked at me the way he did, like I was nothing. He never invited me to his apartment, never let me meet his colleagues. Whenever I visited, he'd meet me outside, rushing me away from anyone who might see us together. I remember once I tried to hug him in front of his friends. Just a mother's instinct, to wrap her arms around the boy she gave life to. But he stiffened, pulled back, and hissed under his breath, "Don't. You're embarrassing me." Embarrassing. That's what I had become, and the little boy who once promised, "I'll take care of you one day, Mama," now avoided my eyes. He didn't see the woman who carried him on her back when his little legs were too tired. He didn't see the mother who worked herself to the bone so he could study, eat, and dream freely. No, he only saw my worn hands, my tired clothes, and the poverty he wanted to erase from his story. It broke me in ways I can't explain. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I lost him. Was it when I worked too much? Did he mistake my absence for neglect instead of sacrifice? Or had I given him too much? So much that he grew blind to the cost. But the moment that sealed it came one afternoon. We were outside, neighbors around us, and I asked him softly if he could spare a little time to visit me just for dinner. He laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he looked at me with those cold eyes and said, Why would I waste my time in that pathetic little house? The word pathetic clung to me like poison. My cheeks burned as people turned their heads, pretending not to watch. That's when I knew. The son I had raised, the boy who once saw me as his hero, he was gone. In his place stood a stranger who looked at me as if I were dirt beneath his shoes. And if I thought that moment was painful, I hadn't yet seen how far his cruelty could go. It happened so fast, yet it plays in my mind in slow motion, like a nightmare I can't wake up from. I had gone to see him that day, not to ask for money, not to trouble him, just to see my son. I carried a small bag of groceries, a gesture of love, a way to remind him that no matter how far apart we seemed, I was still his mother. I thought maybe we could share a meal, maybe I could hear about his life, maybe he could let me in again. But when he opened the door, the look on his face cut me deeper than any words. Disgust. That's what I saw. Not surprise, not joy, not even irritation, but pure disgust. What are you doing here? He snapped, his voice sharp, impatient. Behind him, I could see the gleaming furniture, the polished floors. His world. A world I had broken my body to help him reach. I just came to see you, I whispered. My voice sounded small, even to me. I thought we could eat together. He glanced at the bag in my hands. A few apples, some bread, rice. His lip curled. You show up here with this? He shook his head and laughed bitterly. You'll never stop being pathetic, will you? His words stung, but before I could gather myself, it happened. He spat. The warm, wet sting landed on my cheek, sliding down my skin before I even realized what had happened. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands froze around the grocery bag. My heart stopped. The world tilted, and then the bag slipped. The bread tumbled onto the floor, an apple bounced and rolled across the pavement, and the crack of a jar breaking seemed to echo louder than anything else. I stood there trembling, unable to breathe. I heard someone gasp from the sidewalk. Neighbors had seen. Strangers, too. But he didn't care. My son didn't care. Don't come around here again, he said coldly, his voice like stone. You're an embarrassment. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat burned, my eyes blurred, and I could only stare at him. At the child I once held against my chest, the boy who used to beg me never to let go. Now he stood taller, stronger, and I had never felt so small in front of him. I wiped my cheek with the back of my sleeve, but the stain wasn't gone. No, that spit wasn't just on my skin. It was in my soul. Slowly, I bent down, picking up the scattered groceries with shaking hands. The jar was shattered beyond repair, glass glittering against the pavement. Just like my heart. My son watched me, arms crossed, no flicker of guilt in his eyes. Only annoyance that I hadn't left already. I forced myself to stand, clutching the torn paper bag to my chest. My body felt heavy, but inside me, something shifted. I had spent years believing I was powerless, that I had no voice, no strength left beyond sacrifice. But in that moment, humiliation carved something new into me. A vow. I looked at him, really looked, and I knew I couldn't stay this broken version of myself any longer. If he saw me as dirt, then let him. Because one day, he would realize what it meant to stand above me. One day, life would turn, and he would find himself looking up at me. And on that day, he would remember what it felt like to spit on his own mother. For days after that humiliation, I could barely move. I stayed in my small house, sitting by the window, staring at nothing. My cheek no longer carried the spit, but my soul still burned with it. I replayed that moment again and again, the look on his face, the laughter in his voice, the way the world watched me crumble. But one night, as I lay in bed with my tears soaking the pillow, something inside me shifted. I thought about the years I had given him, the nights I worked until dawn, the meals I skipped, the dreams I buried. I thought about how I had given him everything, and he gave me nothing but shame in return. And then a thought came to me, quiet but sharp. What if I stopped living as the poor, broken woman he thought I was? The idea grew like a flame. It started small. A friend of mine, an old coworker from the diner, told me about a property someone was trying to sell cheap. A worn-down apartment building, nothing glamorous, but solid. At first I laughed. How could a woman like me with so little ever think of owning something like that? But my friend looked me in the eye and said, "You've worked harder than anyone I know. Stop thinking of yourself as powerless. Start thinking of yourself as someone who deserves more." Her words lit something in me. I gathered what little savings I had left, and with my friend's help, I scraped together enough for a down payment. It wasn't much. The building needed repairs. The tenants weren't happy, but when I stood in front of it for the first time, the crumbling bricks and peeling paint didn't scare me. They reminded me of myself, worn, overlooked, but still standing. So I took a deep breath and said, "This is mine now." Day by day, I learned. I learned how to fix a leaking faucet, how to patch walls, how to talk to tenants with confidence. I studied the papers, the contracts, the numbers that once scared me. And little by little, I stopped feeling like the woman who had been spat on. I started feeling like someone with power. There were nights when I collapsed into bed, exhausted, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. Not the hopeless kind. This time I was building something, not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. And with each passing week, my strength grew. I saw the building change, the tenants smile, the rent coming in. I began to pay off the loan, slowly but surely. For the first time in years, I felt pride. Still, there was a shadow in my heart. Because while I worked, I thought of him. My son, the one who spat on me. The one who told me I was nothing. I wondered if he still believed that. I wondered if he would ever see me again. Not as the mother he rejected, but as the woman I was becoming. And then I realized something. Fate has a way of circling back. Life doesn't let arrogance go unpunished. One day, in one way or another, our paths would cross again. And when they did, I would not be the same broken mother he left behind. No. When our paths crossed again, he would see me in a position he never expected. And that thought kept me moving, brick by brick, step by step, building not just a home, but a revenge that was quiet, patient, and inevitable. It had been months since I last saw him, months since that spit had burned on my cheek. In that time, my life had quietly transformed. My small, worn-down apartment building was no longer a ruin. It was alive again. The hallways were brighter, the repairs were steady, and the tenants no longer looked at me with pity, but with respect. I had begun to walk with my head held higher. I was no longer just a mother discarded by her son. I was a landlord, a provider, a woman with power in her hands. And then, one evening, fate came knocking in the most ironic way. It was late, almost sunset, when my phone buzzed. A young couple was looking for a place to rent. They were desperate, the caller said, moving quickly, needing something affordable but decent. I agreed to meet them the next day. When the door opened and the couple stepped in, my breath froze in my chest. There he was, my son, and beside him, his new wife, the one who had smirked as he spat on me. For a moment, I thought my knees would give out. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. But I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face unreadable. They didn't even notice me at first. They were too busy arguing in low voices about money. Then he looked up, and his face drained of color. "Mom?" he whispered as if he'd seen a ghost. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply adjusted my glasses, straightened my back, and said the words that tasted like sweet justice on my tongue. "Good evening." "I'm the landlord." "You're here about the apartment?" His wife's jaw dropped. She looked between us, confused, before stammering, "Wait, she's the landlord." I watched them squirm, watched the memory of what he'd done flicker across his eyes, watched the arrogance melt away, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. For once, I held the power. He tried to recover, clearing his throat. We're just looking. Times have been tough. His voice cracked, and I almost laughed at the irony. Times were tough for him now. For the golden boy who once looked down on me. I led them through the apartment, my steps steady, my voice calm. I pointed out the clean counters, the fixed plumbing, the freshly painted walls. I never let my eyes linger too long on his. I treated him the way he had treated me, as if he were nothing special, just another tenant desperate for a roof. But inside, I was trembling with a mixture of fury and satisfaction. Every word I spoke carried the weight of all the nights I went hungry so he could eat. Every step echoed the years I gave to raise him. Finally, as we stood in the empty living room, his wife turned to me and said, "We'll take it." I looked at them, at their nervous hands, their forced smiles, their pride swallowed, and I thought about all the ways I could reject them, humiliate them, spit them out the way they had spat me out. But no, that would be too easy. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, "Very well. I'll prepare the lease. Rent is due at the start of every month. Don't be late." And just like that, my son, the boy who once spat on me for being poor, became my tenant. I closed the door after them that evening and leaned against it, shaking with silent laughter. Fate had delivered them straight into my hands. The revenge I had dreamed of was just beginning. He didn't recognize it at first. The lease papers were just another stack of documents, his eyes darting over the fine print without care. But when he came to drop off the first month's rent, his swagger carried him up the narrow stairs. And that's when the door swung open, and there I was. He froze like he had seen a ghost. His jaw slackened, the key slipping from his hand and clattering against the floor. "Mom?" he stammered, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I stood tall, holding the ledger in my hands like a shield. "Welcome to my building," I said evenly. "From now on, you'll be living under my roof." The color drained from his face. He blinked as though trying to wake from a nightmare. "You? You're the landlord?" "Yes," I replied, my tone clipped, steady. "Every wall, every door, every brick in this place belongs to me, and that means you live here by my rules." For the first time in years, the arrogance melted away from his expression. His eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Shame. He tried to laugh it off, to reclaim his swagger. This has to be some kind of joke. I could never. I cut him off, my voice sharp. I could never provide for myself? I could never rise from the humiliation you spat on me with? The word spat hung in the air like smoke, choking the space between us. His face reddened. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to look me in the eye. I didn't mean it that way, he muttered. "You spit in my face," I reminded him coldly. "You made sure the neighbors saw, made sure I knew what you thought of me. And now? Now you will pay your rent on time, and you will follow every rule I set. Do you understand?" His voice cracked. "Mom, please!" "No," I said, steel in my throat. "You had no mercy when I was weak. I will not humiliate you, but I will not let you forget who holds the keys now." The silence between us throbbed like a heartbeat. He swallowed hard, nodding once, twice, as if the weight of it was pressing down on him. For the first time, the power had shifted. I saw it in his trembling hands, in the way his voice faltered. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was my tenant, and he knew it. As he gathered his scattered keys and stepped inside his new apartment, I could see the shame written all over his back. His pride, once towering, had been cut down to size, but I wasn't done yet. Because justice wasn't about his humiliation alone. It was about teaching him the lesson he had refused to learn his entire life. And under my roof, he was about to learn it the hard way. The days that followed were quiet. Almost too quiet. He paid his rent on time, slipped the envelope under my office door without a word. No more swagger. No more sneering glances. Only silence, the kind that comes when pride has been broken and replaced with something heavier, humility. I would see him in the hall sometimes. His head lowered, his steps slower than before. This was the same son who once refused to even acknowledge me in public, who spit on me in front of neighbors. Now he lived 2 doors down, carrying bags of groceries past me, too ashamed to meet my eyes. And strangely, I felt no urge to mock him. No urge to spit back the way he had spit on me. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. It was about balance. And the balance had finally shifted. One evening, I heard a knock on my door. Soft, hesitant. When I opened it, he stood there, his face pale, eyes red-rimmed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, he muttered, "I'm sorry, Mama." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. My chest tightened. It was the apology I thought I would never hear. But apologies, I knew, were easy. Change was harder. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at my table, staring down at his hands like a boy again. "I was wrong," he admitted, voice breaking. "I was ashamed of you. But the truth is, I was ashamed of myself. I thought money made me better. I thought you were weak. But you were the strongest one all along." Tears stung my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "I don't need your flattery, son. What I need is your respect. And respect isn't given with words. It's shown in how you live." He nodded slowly, the weight of my words sinking in. For once, he wasn't the proud man with a cruel tongue. He was just my son again, flawed, broken, but human. From that day, things began to change. He worked harder, paid not only his rent, but offered to help with small repairs around the building. He greeted me with respect, not arrogance. And though the scars of his betrayal would never fully heal, I found a strange peace in knowing the lesson had been taught, and the tables had turned. He once spat on me for being poor. Now he lived under my roof, by my rules, surviving on the dignity he once tried to strip from me. And that, more than revenge, more than pride, was justice.